It's 3 in the morning. The sun went down hours ago, and the thermometer outside this apartment window still reads 84 degrees. Think about that. The hottest part of the day is supposed to be long behind us. The streets should be cooling. The walls should be giving back the heat they soaked up at noon. Instead, the air just sits there, heavy, still, refusing to let go. Inside, the fan is only moving warm air in a circle, and the body lying in that bed has not had a single hour, all day or all night, to actually cool down. That is what a heat dome does. And right now, one of the largest of the year is sitting on top of more than 230 million Americans. Forecasters have a nickname for the kind of high-pressure system doing this. They call it a death ridge. It is not a marketing word. It is what meteorologists actually say to each other when a ridge gets this strong, this stubborn, and this wide. And this one has parked itself over the country in the days leading up to the 4th of July, the long holiday weekend, the biggest outdoor celebration on the American calendar. Here is what I want you to take away by the end of this. The most dangerous hour of this entire heat wave is not the middle of the afternoon. It is 3 in the morning. By the end, you will understand exactly why, and why the people who study heat stopped looking at the daytime high a long time ago. You will understand what a heat dome actually is, where this one is hitting and when, the second threat that almost no coverage is talking about, and the truth behind the conspiracy theories already spreading about who supposedly made it. I am the Horizon Lab. We do this calmly, with real data, and we name our sources as we go. No panic, no invented numbers. If you find that useful, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and how hot it is outside your window right now. Let's get into it. Start with the simplest question. What is a heat dome, really? Picture a pot of water on the stove with a heavy lid pressed down on top. The lid traps the steam. The heat has nowhere to escape, so it builds and builds. A heat dome is that lid, except it is made of air. It is a vast ridge of high pressure that settles over a region and sinks down on it from above. As that air sinks, it compresses, and compressed air heats up, the same way a bicycle pump gets warm when you push the handle down. That sinking, compressing air does 2 more things, and both make it worse. It pushes the clouds away, because rising air makes clouds, and this air is doing the opposite. So the sun comes down unfiltered, day after day, and it acts like a cap that nothing can punch through. No cold front, no thunderstorm, no relief. The hot air at the surface is sealed in under the lid, and it has nowhere to go. The technical name for the strongest, most locked-in version of this pattern is an omega block. Look at a weather map of it, and the jet stream literally bends into the shape of the Greek letter omega, a big upside-down U, with the ridge of high pressure bulging north inside the curve. When the jet stream buckles into that shape, it stalls. The whole pattern stops moving, and a weather system that stops moving is a weather system that gets to do its damage to the same people for days in a row. That word, stalls, is the key to everything. A normal hot day is uncomfortable, and then it ends. The sun sets, a breeze picks up, a storm rolls through, and the next morning resets. A heat dome takes that reset away. It traps the heat through the night, and then hands the next day a head start. Day 2 is hotter than day 1. Day 3 is hotter than day 2. The ground itself becomes a battery, soaking up heat it never fully releases. Now, why is this particular dome the one worth your attention? Because the National Weather Service is calling it the most widespread significant heat of 2026 so far. Earlier this year, the record-breaking heat was out in the desert southwest, a region that is at least built for it. This time, the target is different. The bullseye is on the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, and then the entire Interstate 95 corridor in the east. These are places with dense cities, older housing, and millions of homes without reliable air conditioning. Places that have not yet had a long, brutal stretch this season. Places, in other words, that are not ready. And it is arriving with almost theatrical timing. The peak window runs from the 29th of June into the 1st of July, right as tens of millions of people start traveling, gathering outdoors and lining up for fireworks. The collision of the worst heat of the year with the most crowded outdoor weekend of the year is not a coincidence the dome planned. but it is a problem nobody can wish away. So let's look at exactly where this thing is and who is standing underneath it. Let's put it on the map. As this dome builds, the National Weather Service has hundreds of millions of people under heat warnings, heat advisories, and watches. The numbers being reported run from about 200 million to more than 230 million people affected at one point or another this week. Let me say that again, because the scale is the story. More than 2/3 of the population of the United States under one connected blanket of dangerous heat at the same time. The forecast peak runs from the 29th of June through the 1st of July. In the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Ohio Valley, the heat index is expected to climb between 105 and 110 degrees. In some spots, it touches 115. Now, that phrase, heat index, matters. So let's be precise about it. The heat index is what the temperature feels like to your body once you factor in humidity, because when the air is already thick with moisture, your sweat cannot evaporate, and evaporation is the only way your body cools itself. So a reading of 95 degrees on the thermometer in soaking humidity can stress your body the way a 110-degree dry day would. The number on the thermometer lies to you. The heat index tells the truth. The cities in the path read like a list of America's heartland: Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Nashville. Then, as the dome marches east midweek, it swallows the coast. Washington, D.C. is forecast to hit or pass 100 degrees for as many as 4 days in a row. Philadelphia is looking at the century mark on 2 or 3 days in a city whose average high this time of year sits in the upper 80s. New York City, Newark, Pittsburgh, all of them climbing into the high 90s with a heat index well past 100. The National Weather Service has its own scale for this, and they have updated it in recent years specifically because the old warnings were not landing. It is called heat risk, and it runs from level 0 to level 4. Tens of millions of people this week are in a level 3, which the service labels major, or a level 4, which it labels extreme. Those are not words about discomfort. A level 4 day is defined as heat that is rare, long-lasting, and dangerous to anyone, not just the vulnerable. Anyone, including people who think of themselves as healthy, young, and tough. That is the daytime picture, and it is bad enough. But the daytime picture is also the one everybody already understands. So now I want to show you the part the headlines keep getting wrong. Because there is a second feature to this event, and it is the one the forecasters are actually most worried about. Before we get there, one more wrinkle on the setup, because it explains why this dome is so stubborn. This is not really one heat dome, it is two. Meteorologists tracking the pattern describe a setup where separate ridges of high pressure essentially join forces, one building up out of the south over the Gulf, another settling over the center of the country. As they merge, they reinforce each other into a single, enormous, slow grinding ridge. Watch how it moves over the week, and you can see the menace in it. Early in the week, the heat is centered over the Midwest and the Great Lakes. By around the 1st of July, the ridge is forecast to plant itself over St. Louis, with its effects stretching from the Great Lakes all the way down to Texas. And then, toward the 4th itself, the center drifts back toward Chicago, with widespread heat in the 90s, spreading from Wisconsin to the East Coast to the Gulf. It does not pass through. It wanders, slowly, over the same exhausted region, like a weight rolling back and forth across the same bruise. There is one more ingredient, and it is cruel. Before this heat, much of the country had a dry stretch. Dry soil matters more than people think. When the ground holds moisture, some of the sun's energy goes into evaporating that water instead of heating the air. It is the planet's own swamp cooler. But bake the moisture out of the topsoil, and that natural cooling switch shuts off. All of the sun's energy goes straight into raising the temperature. So a dry landscape under a heat dome does not just get hot, it runs away. Now, the danger that comes after dark. Here is the thing your body needs that a heat dome quietly takes away: recovery. A human being can endure a brutally hot afternoon, as long as the night that follows gives the body a chance to cool, to slow the heart rate, to stop sweating, to rest. That overnight drop is not a comfort. It is a medical necessity. It is the reset that keeps a hard day from becoming a deadly one. This dome is forecast to deliver record warm overnight lows. In the Midwest and Great Lakes, the low temperatures next week are not expected to fall below the lower to middle 70s. In the cities, the urban areas, they may not drop below 80 degrees at all. That is the death ridge showing its real face, not the afternoon, the night that never comes. To understand why a warm night is so dangerous, you have to understand the limit of the human body. And there is a hard limit. It has a name. Scientists call it the wet bulb temperature. Here is the idea. Your core body temperature has to stay near 98.6 degrees. When you get hot, you sweat, and as that sweat evaporates off your skin, it carries heat away. That is your entire cooling system. It is brilliant, and it has one fatal weakness. It only works if the surrounding air is dry enough to accept more moisture. The wet bulb temperature measures exactly that. It is the lowest temperature you can reach by evaporation alone, given how much water is already in the air. When the wet bulb temperature climbs too high, your sweat stops evaporating. It just runs off you, useless. And at that point, a healthy adult, sitting still in the shade with all the water they can drink, will still overheat. The body cannot shed the heat fast enough. The core temperature rises, and the clock starts. That is the physiology underneath the scary headlines. It is why the heat index, not the thermometer, is what forecasters watch. It is why humidity is the silent multiplier. And it is why this Midwestern, Gulf-fed dome, thick with moisture pumped up from the south, is more dangerous than a dry desert number that sounds higher. So who does the heat take first? The body's defenses weaken with age, which is why the elderly are at the top of the risk list. People with heart conditions, because cooling yourself is work, and a strained heart can fail under it. People on certain medications that interfere with sweating or hydration. Outdoor workers who do not get to step inside. Infants. And, again in the records, people who are simply alone, indoors, with no working air conditioning and no one checking on them. And this is where the warm night becomes lethal. If the temperature never drops, the apartment never cools. The walls hold the day's heat and radiate it back all night long. The body that needed 8 hours of recovery gets none. It goes into the next brutal day already behind, already overheated, with no reserve left. Do that for 3, 4, 5 days in a row, and otherwise survivable heat becomes a body count. The afternoon makes the headlines. The night fills the morgues. There is a second system that fails under a heat dome, and it is not a body. It is the power grid. Think about what happens when 200 million people are all trying to cool down at once. Every air conditioner in a third of the country switches on and stays on, day and night, for days. Electricity demand spikes to what is called peak load, the maximum the system is built to handle, and a heat dome pushes whole regions toward that ceiling at the exact same time. The big grid operators, the ones with names like MISO across the middle of the country, and PJM across the mid-Atlantic, watch these stretches with real anxiety, because the margin between supply and demand gets thin. Now stack the dangers. The power lines themselves carry less current efficiently when they are hot. Transformers run hotter and can fail, and the demand is highest precisely when the system is most strained. If something breaks, if a plant trips offline, if demand outruns supply, the operator may have to protect the whole grid by cutting power to some customers on purpose. That is a rolling blackout. And here is the nightmare scenario the planners lose sleep over. A blackout during a heat dome at night. Because the moment the power goes, the air conditioning goes, the fans stop, and the one technology keeping vulnerable people alive inside those overheated apartments simply switches off. In the dark, during the most dangerous hours, the heat does not need the grid to fail to kill, but if the grid fails, the heat does the rest. If all of this sounds theoretical, it is not. We have watched it happen, and the clearest, most studied example in American history happened in a single city, over a single week, more than 30 years ago. Chicago, July 1995. A heat dome settled over the city. The temperatures were extreme, but what made it a catastrophe was exactly what we have been describing. The nights would not cool, the humidity was suffocating, and the heat sat on the city for days. By the time it broke, the death toll in Chicago alone was around 739 people. Let me say that number again, because we have learned to think of heat as the gentle disaster, the one without the drama of a hurricane or a quake. Around 739 people died in one city in roughly 1 week from heat. And when researchers went back and studied who died, the findings reshaped how scientists understand heat forever. The victims were overwhelmingly elderly. They were disproportionately people living alone. They were concentrated in neighborhoods where people were isolated, where it did not feel safe to open a window or sleep outside, where there was no one to knock on the door. Many died in upper-floor apartments that had become ovens, with the windows shut. People who, with one phone call, one neighbor, one open cooling center they trusted, might have lived. The heat did not kill at random. It found the cracks in the social fabric, and it poured in. That is the lesson Chicago wrote in 1995, and it is the lesson this week is testing again. If Chicago showed us how a heat dome kills, an event much closer to our own time showed us how far one can break the rules. The summer of 2021, the Pacific Northwest. This is a corner of the country famous for being mild. Seattle, Portland, the green coast of Oregon and Washington, and just north across the border, British Columbia. These are places where, historically, many homes did not even have air conditioning because they never seemed to need it. And then a heat dome formed overhead that was so extreme scientists struggled to describe it. It was the same physics we have been talking about, a ridge of high pressure, sinking air, an omega block that locked into place, but the intensity went beyond anything the modern record had on file for that region. Portland, Oregon, a city of rain and evergreens, hit a temperature around 116 degrees. Not the heat index, the actual air temperature. And then there was a small village in British Columbia named Lytton. On consecutive days, Lytton kept breaking the all-time temperature record for the entire country of Canada. It peaked at about 49.6 degrees Celsius. In the numbers most of us use, that is just over 121 degrees Fahrenheit in Canada. And then, the day after it set that record, Lytton caught fire and was very nearly destroyed. The heat had baked the landscape into kindling, and a fire moved through the village so fast that people barely escaped with their lives. The town that had just shown the world a terrifying new number was, within a day, mostly gone. The human toll of that heat dome was severe. In British Columbia alone, the heat was tied to more than 600 deaths. Across the wider Pacific Northwest, including the American side, the toll ran into the hundreds more, and the people who died, once again, were disproportionately older, often alone, often in homes with no way to cool down, in a region that had simply never been built for heat like this. The same signature as Chicago, written again, 26 years later, in a place that thought it was safe. That is the warning the Pacific Northwest holds for the cities under the dome this week. It is not that this week will be as extreme as 2021. It may well not be. The warning is about the places that assume they are not heat country. Comfort is not protection. A dome can find anyone. And here is what should make the hair on your neck stand up. This is not only happening here. Right now, as this dome bakes the United States, the continent of Europe is suffering through its own. At the very same time, Western Europe is locked under its own omega block, its own death ridge, and the records are already falling. In Spain, the town of Andújar recorded a temperature around 45 degrees Celsius, which is over 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The United Kingdom, a country that thinks of 30 degrees Celsius as a serious heat wave, smashed its June record, and the death toll has already begun. In Spain alone, more than 300 heat-related deaths have been linked to the heat that began in the third week of June. Europe knows where this road leads, because Europe has walked it before. In the summer of 2003, a heat wave across the continent killed an astonishing number of people. The most cited estimates run as high as around 70,000 deaths across Europe over that summer. 70,000. France was hit especially hard, and much of the toll, yet again, was elderly people, many of them alone, many in cities during a stretch when much of the country was away on holiday and no one was there to check. So sit with the shape of this moment. 2 continents, 1 week, 2 separate ridges of high pressure, each acting as a lid. each trapping heat over hundreds of millions of people on opposite sides of the Atlantic at the same time. That is not a thing that used to happen casually. It is the kind of pattern that makes climate scientists pay very close attention, and we will get to why in a moment. But first, I want to slow down, because it is easy to talk about 70,000 deaths, or 700 deaths, as numbers. And the danger of numbers that big is that they stop meaning anything. So let me tell you who the heat actually takes, in the truest terms the records will support, without inventing a single person. It takes the woman in her 80s on the 3rd floor, whose air conditioner broke last summer and who never got it fixed, and who keeps the windows shut because the street does not feel safe. It takes the man with a bad heart who tells his daughter on the phone that he is fine, do not worry, do not drive all this way. It takes the construction worker, the roofer, the farm laborer who cannot simply step inside. It takes the people who fall through the gaps between us. That is what the postmortems from Chicago and from Europe show, over and over. The heat is not random, it is a mirror. It shows us exactly who we have left alone. And it is checking on them this week, in 230 million American homes, while most of us are thinking about the holiday. So why is this happening? Why do two continents end up under death ridges in the same week? And why does it feel like these events keep getting more intense? Let's be careful here, because this is exactly the place where good science and bad noise get tangled together. So I am going to stick to what the agencies actually say. The first piece of the puzzle is a pattern in the Pacific Ocean called El Niño. As of the 11th of June this year, the NOAA Climate Prediction Center has an El Niño advisory in effect. El Niño is a periodic warming of the surface waters of the central and eastern tropical Pacific, and it is one of the biggest single levers on weather across the whole planet. When it is active, it nudges the odds towards certain patterns, and it tends to push global average temperatures up. And the forecasters are not describing a weak one. There is a real chance, better than half by some outlooks, that this becomes a strong event by the fall, among the more powerful in decades. A strong El Niño is a thumb on the scale, and the scale is already loaded. The second piece is the long, slow background. The reason scientists connect heat waves to a changing climate is not complicated, and it is not political. It is arithmetic. As the average temperature of the planet rises, the entire range of possible temperatures slides upward with it. A heat dome is still a heat dome, the same physics it always was, but it now builds on top of a warmer baseline. So the ridge that would have produced a bad heat wave 30 years ago produces a record-breaking one today. The agencies are blunt about this. Heat waves are becoming more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting, and the fingerprint of human-caused warming on extreme heat is one of the clearest signals in all of climate science. And if you want a single number that captures how much the system is shifting, look to the poles, where the change shows up first and fastest. This past March, the Arctic sea ice reached its yearly maximum, the point where it stops growing and starts to melt for the summer. That maximum came in at the lowest level ever recorded in the 47 years we have been watching it from satellites. The most ice the Arctic had all year was the least it has ever had. That is the kind of measurement that does not care about anyone's opinion. It is just the planet, keeping its own books. Put those three together, a warming baseline, a strengthening El Niño, and a stalled ridge of high pressure, and you do not get a mystery, you get this week. Now, a heat dome rarely arrives alone, and this one is no exception. The same stalled pattern that traps the heat also stacks other hazards around its edges, and it is worth knowing where they are. On the northern rim of the dome, where the hot air bumps up against cooler air to the north, the atmosphere gets violently unstable. That boundary is a favored track for powerful clusters of thunderstorms, and in the worst case, for a derecho. A derecho is a long-lived, fast-moving wall of severe thunderstorms that produces destructive straight-line winds across hundreds of miles. And here is the cruel part. A derecho can knock out power for hundreds of thousands of people during a heat dome, which brings us right back to the blackout nightmare we talked about earlier. The same week can hand you the heat and then take away the very power you need to survive it. There is also smoke. Wildfires burning in the western part of the continent can send smoke drifting downwind for thousands of miles, and that smoke degrades the air quality across the same regions sweating under the dome. So now the most vulnerable people, the ones with heart and lung conditions, are being asked to cope with dangerous heat and dirty air at the same time, and told both to stay cool and to stay inside. It is a compounding squeeze. This is why forecasters do not look at a heat dome as a single number on a map. They see a system: heat at the center, storms and wind on the rim, smoke on the wind, strain on the grid, and a holiday weekend pulling millions of people outdoors into the middle of it. All right, we have looked at the real danger from every angle. So now I have to deal with the other thing that always shows up during an event like this: the conspiracy theories, because they are already spreading, and I would rather you hear the truth from someone who will show their work. Let me be direct about what this is not. It is not a weapon. Every time there is extreme weather, a version of the same claim goes viral, that a government facility, usually one called HAARP, is secretly steering the atmosphere and cooking us on purpose. So let's actually look at HAARP. It is a real research facility in Gakona, Alaska. It studies the ionosphere, the electrically charged layer of the atmosphere that sits more than 50 miles above your head. It does that by transmitting radio waves upward, with a maximum power of around 3.6 million watts. That sounds like a lot, until you compare it to the thing it is supposedly controlling. Weather happens in the lowest layer of the atmosphere, the troposphere, the bottom several miles where the air, the moisture, and the heat actually live. The radio frequencies HAARP uses pass through that layer and are absorbed way up high, far above where any weather forms. The energy of a single ordinary thunderstorm dwarfs the entire output of that facility by a factor that is almost comical. You cannot build a continental heat dome with a radio antenna any more than you can move the ocean with a garden hose. NOAA itself has had to publicly fact-check these claims. And it is not the chemtrail story either. The idea that the lines you see behind aircraft are some secret spraying program driving the heat. Those are contrails, condensation trails, water vapor freezing into ice crystals in the cold air at altitude, the same way your breath fogs on a winter morning. There is also a real and separate thing people confuse this with. Scientists have proposed studying whether reflecting a little sunlight could one day cool the planet, an idea called solar geoengineering. But the most famous proposed experiment was actually cancelled back in 2024 before it ever put anything into the sky. A proposal that got cancelled is not a secret program running over your city. And then there is the opposite myth, the one that says, look, the Antarctic ice grew back 1 month, so the whole thing is a hoax. But you cannot pick 1 month at one pole and throw out the global record. Remember the number we just covered. The Arctic just hit its lowest yearly maximum in the entire satellite era. The long-term direction of the planet's ice is not in question, and a single noisy data point does not erase 47 years of measurement. So here is the honest, uncomfortable truth, and it is the reason this channel exists. The reassuring version of this story is the conspiracy. Because a conspiracy means someone is in control, someone has a hand on the dial, and if someone is steering, then someone can stop. The reality is colder than that. There is no hand on the dial. This heat dome is the physics of a warming planet, a stalled jet stream, and an ocean pattern shifting into a higher gear, all unfolding with nobody at the wheel. The truth is more unsettling than the conspiracy, because the truth is that no one is in control. That is exactly why understanding it and preparing for it is the only power any of us actually has. So let's talk about that power. What do you actually do this week with all of this? Keep it simple and keep it about the night. The single most important idea to take from everything we have covered is that your body needs to cool down at some point in every 24 hours. If your home does not cool down at night, you need a plan to put your body somewhere that does. That is what a cooling center is for. Most cities open them during heat events, in libraries, community centers, and public buildings. Using one is not weakness. It is the single most protective thing a person without reliable air conditioning can do, and in the records we have, it is the difference between the people who lived and the people who did not. Drink water before you feel thirsty, because in this kind of heat, thirst lags behind dehydration. Go easy on alcohol and heavy meals, especially outdoors at a holiday gathering, because both make it harder for your body to regulate. Learn the warning signs that separate heat exhaustion from heat stroke. Heat exhaustion is heavy sweating, weakness, dizziness, a fast and weak pulse, nausea. The body is struggling but still fighting. Heat stroke is the emergency. It is a body temperature that has spiked, skin that may be hot and dry because sweating has actually stopped, confusion, slurred speech, collapse. Heat stroke is a call for emergency help immediately, while you cool the person any way you can. And here is the one that ties this whole video together. Check on the people who fall through the cracks. The elderly neighbor, the relative who lives alone, the friend with a bad heart who insists they are fine. Every post-mortem from Chicago to Europe says the same thing, that a single knock on a door could have changed the outcome. You cannot fix the jet stream, you cannot cool the Pacific, but you can make one phone call, and on a week like this, that call is not small, it might be everything. If you are gathering outdoors for the 4th, shift the hard activity to the early morning or the evening. Find shade, build in breaks, and watch the kids and the older folks closely, because they overheat faster and complain about it less. None of this is dramatic. That is the point. The dome is dramatic. The response does not have to be. It just has to happen before the worst of it, not after. So let's bring it home. A ridge of high pressure has settled over the country, the kind forecasters call a death ridge, and it is holding dangerous heat over more than 230 million people right through the 4th of July. The real danger is not only the afternoon, it is the night that will not cool, the grid that has to hold, and the people we have left alone. We have seen this exact story before, in Chicago, in the Pacific Northwest, in Europe, and the lesson every single time was the same. Heat is the quiet disaster. It does its killing in the dark, out of the headlines, and it spares the people who are ready. This ridge will break. They always do. A pattern shift will come. The jet stream will straighten out. A front will finally push through, and a morning will arrive that actually feels cooler. But here is the part I want you to carry past this one weekend. The ridge will break. The pattern that built it will not. Because the engine that is going to drive heat like this deeper into every summer ahead has a name. And right now, out in the Pacific, it is waking up. That is the story I will tell you next.